what have we got here? A fantastic Apothecary set. And the name on the top was Dunlop. And I see in here there's a card. Now, we've done a little bit of research, I can see here, into the surgeon himself, A. Dunlop. Now, it says here that he was in the 38th Foot Regiment, commissioned in 1796 and retired in 1803, and was stationed out in the West Indies.
Yes.
Now, how did you get that?
From the
info?
Army Gazette.
Well done. Terrific. Well, we can date it very accurately then from that to the turn of the 19th century. It's not perhaps the most decorative or the most lavish or the most elaborate, but it's obviously a very good, useful, serviceable chest. And what we have here are some little cabinets, rolled steel compartments, which would have been used to keep things in. It looks as if it's galvanized on the outside, and inside, let's just see what... Oh, well, now that's interesting to see. We've got some hair inside, and of course that was used by surgeons to stem the flow of blood in
the field.
That's right. With a major wound, they would either burn the wound with a red hot piece of iron, and then they would put something like that in it to stem the bleeding.
Yes.
Terribly unhygienic, you can imagine.
Oh, yes.
Poor things. Oh, this is good. The mixture, diarrhea, adult dose. Now, how much? It doesn't look as if that's had a lot of use. It was obviously filthy stuff to take. Has it been used in the family at all?
Do you want to know?
Am I going to like the answer? What did you use it for?
Cow medicines. And animal medicines.
Oh, was it? So these were sort of full of patent pre-James Herriot type mixtures for mending horses and cows.
Yes, and were used.
Oh, it was? Yeah. Well, I must say it's kept in remarkably good shape. I must just see if there's anything useful in the bottom there. What's it? Now, that hasn't had quite so much use, has it? No. In here, you perhaps would have had a pestle and mortar and maybe a little mixing palette for mixing up the drugs and so on. Now, having had it in the family, I presume nobody's had it valued.
No, never.
Well, the value of a apothecary's set is very much determined by its condition, both externally and internally, and how original everything is inside. And I would put the value today at between £500 and £800.
Oh, very nice. This one's stuck.
Oh, it is stuck, isn't it?
That's it.
I hate doing this. You never know what's going to happen.
What's going to happen, yes.
It's a wonderful lot, actually.
And this.
I mean, tell you what I always like is when you've got an original box, and with this, everyone spent time reading it, it would actually refer to the actual pot that's in there. And some of them, you even get dates, and that is really very exciting. Yeah. It's an interesting little group. It suggests to me that this lot was actually picked out in the Far East. I mean, funnily enough, in the 1900s, English people were going on honeymoon to Japan, and they would go to the manufacturers and actually buy things on the premises, often in a box. They're all roughly the same date, around 1900, 1920. This pair are particularly fine quality.
They are beautiful.
They are beautiful, aren't they? And if you get a glass on them, every little piece, what appears to be a shadow or a cloud is made up of minute gold dots.
Really?
Yeah, put on with a single hair of a brush. Magic. And a pair like that, although they're tiny, are probably worth £300 to £500.
Gracious.
Shop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
These are much less good.
Now those I'm very fond of.
Well, there we are.
Shades of that, you see.
Yeah, well, that's right. And they're flowers, and of course they're popular. The price of these depends almost entirely on how well painted they are, and also who the manufacturer and painter was. A pair like that is going to be worth around £150 to £250. These are better still. That is really very good quality painting.
Lovely shape too.
Nice shape. Millefleur on the top, everything going for it. That pair, well, I think that pair would probably push £1,000, you know? You thanking your ancestors now, are you?
Thank you myself, I haven't thrown them out.
But this one's a real knockout. I mean, it's super pot. The annoying thing is I can't make head or tail of that mark. But this is by somebody really very good. It looks like Meissen, but it's not he. That one, 1,500, 2,000 pounds.
My goodness, I had no idea they were worth so much.
I bet you didn't.
No,
Anyway, you
no.
do now.
I
So you've got to
love
take
them. I love the colouring.
That is the
That's probably
important
why I've
bit.
kept them.
Thank you very much for
How
being
much
on.
did you say?
1,500 to 2,000.
Gracious. Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's a straw marquetry box made by the prisoners of war in the Napoleonic Wars.
These boxes were made by the prisoners who were incarcerated in England in prisons all over the country. Dartmoor, the biggest one was at Norman Cross, which is down towards Peterborough. Doesn't exist any longer. And what they did was in order to supplement their rations, they made things out of the materials that were to hand. So they were able to take bones from the kitchen and obviously straw, wheat and oat straw, which they then used to make decorative objects that they could sell. If we look inside, you'll see this stunning picture, which hasn't faded at all. I mean, it's in absolutely marvellous condition. And the straw is laid down onto the carcass, sometimes just like marquetry, and then other times it's cut and fitted together like mosaic. And you can see along the bottom of this square-rigged ship, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and it's been finely cut and fitted together. And the scene depicts a square-rigged ship sailing into a naval harbour. And these are obviously not English buildings. I mean, the proportions are completely different. Is it something you've always had?
I actually bought it about 30 years ago in a covered market in Durham.
What did you pay for it?
8 shillings. Is it 40 pence?
40 pence. Well, I suppose if you wanted to sell it now, you'd get somewhere in the region of £300 to £500.
Really?
We've got a beetle at the easel, and we've got a wasp who's got some piece of paper, possibly reciting, an ordinary fly, and then we've got a couple of crickets or grasshoppers at a piano with a bee playing it. I was tempted to think that it might have been the composition of the Flight of the Bumblebee, but it's too early for that, because it's in fact by a Belgian artist, and it's signed on the bottom left here, Bonfoy, Auguste Bonfoy, and he was painting in the middle of the 19th century, and it's dated 1850. Now, he's more noted for his still lifes, and here we have a painting of 2 years earlier, which is signed and dated 1848, and I would have thought it's a kind of picture which he was able to sell far more easily. But it does show an interest in insects and small details, and on the shelf you can see the moth and the shell, and also the fallen flower from the pot on the left-hand side. But I think, in a way, this is the star, and so unusual. And I'm sure that everybody who comes to see it is always drawn to it,
Well, they're
isn't it?
intrigued by it, or they dislike it thoroughly because of the insects.
Oh, really?
Just
Yes, come
depends whether
absolutely.
you're pro-insect or not.
Not, yes. Well, now we really come on to the value. It is difficult because, as you say, it's not everybody's taste. But I would have thought that probably it is should be valued region of between £2,000 and £3,000, which is probably the same figure for the still life. I don't know if that's a surprise or whatever. Perhaps it's what you had already had in mind.
The value to us is that we're very fond of them.
Well, because I think one of the problems with small pieces or miniature pieces is how to categorise them. And is it doll's furniture, or is it a miniature, or an apprentice piece? I always doubt the last one. I've only seen about 3 apprentice pieces in my whole working career. However, this is of such good quality that I think it's more than just a doll's piece of furniture. It may well be a sample from which the traveller could sell, or the shop could sell, and say, well, yes, this is the model. Then you may adjust the various mounts and have this combination or that. It's Kingwood, it's French, and most certainly in a sort of 1845 to 1860 period. And I love that green inside, that you cannot fake that colour. It is just an unachievable old colour. It's lovely. And you use it? Flowers?
Yes, for flowers and that sort of thing. It's quite pretty, flowers on the top.
Today, would cost you £1,800, £2,000 to replace it. Oh, fine. Lovely.
Lovely.
If we look inside here, there's the most superb piece of cameo carving, which would have been viewed through these viewers from this side.
That's the view that I prefer from the back.
Right. And, well, if you look at the way she's carved, it's absolutely so crisp. It's not sadly signed. I was rather hoping it would be. I would suggest the date is 1840, 1850, that sort of period, and is probably one of the best periods of Bohemian glass that you're likely to find. It has had some damage, and I think if this went to auction, it would make between 600 and 800.
Do you know, 30 years ago, on a programme called Going for a Song, the first time I ever went on television, I had to talk about a plate painted by the same man who painted this one. And he was called James Giles. And he worked in Cockspur Street in London, and he decorated porcelain. In this case, he decorated a piece of porcelain from Worcester. James Giles is very easy to recognise because he has this wonderful, clear palette. The colours are really translucent, there's beautiful turquoise, and all the other colours, the light really shines through them. Now, if this was an ordinary Worcester plate painted at the factory, it would be worth a few £100. When it's painted by James Giles, you change gear completely. And it becomes worth thousands of pounds. Now, how did you get it?
My husband bought it not long after we were married.
Is that just 2 or 3 years ago?
33.
33 years ago?
Yeah.
And how much did it cost you?
Well, around about £30, I understand.
Well, I think that you're looking at 100 times that, £3,000. And it's a brilliant specimen.
Despite the chicken on the top, I don't think this was meant for eggs. I think it's just a decorative bowl and cover.
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
No, it's Amari.
Imari.
Yes.
Which is?
Japanese.
Very good. Where was it made?
I have no idea.
Well, most people then say, of course, it's Imari, but it wasn't actually made there. It was made at Arita and came out through the port of Imari.
Oh, right.
And this style of underglazed blue, iron red and gilding is what characterises the palette, the actual colour scheme.
Yes.
It started coming out in the 17th century. It was very popular in Holland.
Yes.
The Dutch took it from Japan to Holland. And then when William of Orange, took over the throne of England, Mary brought this stuff with her, and it became very popular in England. And you can find it in places like Hampton Court, listed in the inventories.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's actually about 1680 in date. So it's quite an early piece.
Yes.
Now, this one suffered a bit because although that is exactly what it should be, a cockerel,
Yes.
this one's been carved out of wood. This is not original.
Oh, really?
And it's been broken off and presumably too smashed to put back.
Yes.
And they've copied the bits and put it together as wood, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And they've done a very good job on it. I mean, it really is good. It's actually a jolly nice piece. That's a bit of a tragedy. Obviously, that's going to affect the value quite a bit. But nevertheless, it's handsome.
Yes.
And they're not that common.
No, no.
Very interior decorators piece, you know. I should think it would make somewhere around £2,000, £2,500.
Yeah.
Very, very nice.
Now, you may remember earlier in the series, I posed 3 questions as part of our tea competition, and each week was joined by one of our experts who told us more about antiques that were particularly associated with the long British tradition of tea drinking. Well, I now have the answers to those questions.
The first question was, what is this called? And the answer is a moat spoon. Question 2, which English lady gave her name to this type of teapot? And the answer is Lady Cadogan. And for the third question, in which language does the word caddy originate? And the answer is Malay. So many congratulations to our winner, Mr. A.G. Bettridge from Gravesend in Kent, who'll receive a voucher to the value of £2,500, and our 3 runners-up who'll receive £500 vouchers, which they can spend on antiques of their choice. Congratulations to you all. In the meantime, back to our experts.
As we sit here not far from the banks of the River Tees with this lovely book on fly fishing, I feel the shades of old fishermen coming to look over our shoulders. This is a lovely book. Alfred Ronald's The Fly Fisher's Entomology, illustrated by coloured representations of the natural and artificial insect. And inside, 20 copper plates. This is a second edition printed in 1839. But the colour plates are rather spectacular. Let me see if I can turn to one. On one side here, we have the hand-coloured plates of the insects, what they're supposed to look like. And as we turn over this wrapper here, you have the actual original flies made in 1839 for the fishermen here. And surrounding the flies are the components of the fly, how it is made up. The other thing I like about this book is that the original owner of it has actually added to it. He's put in his own notes here, we can see at the bottom. He's put in a note here. He's also stuck in a little pheasant feather here, and going through, he's put in other notes in pencil and other things. How did you collect this book?
My father, who is a very keen fisherman, was given it 30, 35 years ago by a friend of my grandfather. Yes. But I don't know who he was.
Well, I think it's absolutely splendid. And in such superb condition, too. It's a second edition, which is not as important as the first. And some people would say that because of the inscriptions in it, the notes, it wouldn't be as valuable. But they're early notes, and in my view, they add to the book. And therefore, I would value this replacement value at about £500.
Seems a bit unexpected to find a picture by a Spanish artist here in Durham. I see this is actually by El Garrido, it's signed down here. That's,
yes.
That's Leandro Ramon Garrido.
That's right. Yes, yes.
Now, how did this come about?
Well, it was given to my father by the artist in 1908. He was evidently up in the neighbourhood of Whitby, where my father lived, and I don't know how they got acquainted, but my father would talk to anybody.
But this was an area where artists came a lot.
Yes. This is a letter which he wrote when he sent the picture.
That's wonderful.
They haven't
wonderful,
met.
Pristine letter. This is dated 17th of January 1908.
Yes.
And it says, "Dear Mr. Foster, I had not forgotten my promise, but have been rather unsettled since I left your breezy shores." It's a nice little touch there.
Yes.
The accompanying sketch is a bit of the river at the Slights, a local beauty spot.
A local beauty spot.
It's a rather charming scene, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is, yeah.
Very, very spontaneously painted. Yes. It's got a wonderful immediacy about it, because Garrido was, although I think I'm right in saying he had a Spanish father, an English mother, he was essentially a French painter. Very much a painter en plein air, in the open air, painting what he saw immediately onto the canvas. And that's certainly what he's done in this very fresh little sketch here, hasn't he? I love this area of the tablecloth with the picnic. Yes, I think the way that's painted is very nice with those reflections. And what's particularly good, too, is this very bold area of white through the trees, which is, in fact, the reflection of light on the water beyond.
Yes.
But it's really boldly put on, and it's only when you look at it properly that you see how it works and how well it all hangs together. Thank you very much for bringing it. I should just add, I suppose, that from a value point of view, you should be probably thinking of insuring it for something like £1,500, that sort of area. But with that very strong personal connection, I'm sure the last thing you'd think of doing would be selling it. Thank you.
Like you, I've just been looking at some of the marvellous portraits in this room, but I've been looking from a point of view of the frames rather than the pictures, because there's some wonderful frames here, but nothing quite like this one. Now, this is your dressing mirror, is it?
Well, not quite, no.
It doesn't look, actually, as if it's been used very much recently. Has it been stored away?
Yes, I think it's been in the attic for about 10 years.
Right. What a stunning frame. And the unusual thing is, of course, that it is actually metal. and covered with Chinese decoration. We call this chinoiserie. We had 3 major periods of chinoiserie in our history, and the Chinese influence was overriding everything else in current fashion. The first at the end of the 17th century, so between 1690 and 1710, then it went out a bit, and then came sweeping back in about 1745, 1750 for the second chinoiserie, and then again faded slightly to be reintroduced around about 1800, and then that's what we call Brighton Pavilion chinoiserie. This is rather like sort of detective work, because it's made of tin. Now, tinware in England and Wales was very popular after 1800, but the design here is much earlier. This is not as early as 1690, so it must be, I think, 1760, 1765. If you look around it carefully, this is very, very detailed. And you've got set scenes. You've got little houses with pagoda tops, and yet you've got typical Western flowers. And then lovely, lovely monkeys. You've got one each side. This chap's pointing at one, the other side over there, and he's sort of laughing and looking up to the centre, which is Earl Spencer's crest. Now, that's family crest, I presume.
Yes.
My goodness. Well, actually, that would tie in quite well with the date of 1760, 1770. Now, what I want to do, actually, is to turn it round and see, look here. You've got a marvellous example of some mitred corners and that lovely sort of moulding around there, which is typical 1760, 1770, from a joining point of view or from a cabinet point of view. And along here, all the metal is joined and secured with these little handmade rivets. Again, by 1800, they would have been much more sophisticated. And in 1690, they hadn't started to do that. So, as I say, it's sort of like detective work, really. This is just magic. Actually, it's the only one of its type I've handled. I've seen one other similar, but it is extremely rare. Very, very desirable object.
How much does that make it worth, if I'm allowed to ask?
Well, you are. I mean, it avoids me having to say, have you any idea?
No, right?
Well, without the provenance, and as a decorative mirror of that period between £8,000 to £10,000. And with that provenance, it could command a price of anything over that. I would have thought for insurance somewhere around about 15,000.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Looking at this, I feel it's so realistic. I can imagine it standing up and saying pieces of 8 at me.
Yes.
And what a wonderful parasol handle it is. Tell me where it came from.
Well, my father has kept it in his knicker drawer all my life. I used to creep in and have a quick peek.
But how did you discover it in the knicker drawer?
I don't really. He must have shown us in a weak moment. But really, it's lived there all its life, as long as I can remember. And it was probably his mother's before that.
How wonderful. It's great to have it in its fitted case here, lovely Morocco leather case. And the handle itself is made out of Malacca here, carved ivory, but it isn't actually a parrot because I can see that there's a button here.
Yes.
It's a sulphur-crested cockatoo.
Yes.
The mounts are rolled gold, and I see here there's a trademark, H&T. Well, I mean, there is a Birmingham manufacturer, Hillier and Thomason, but that isn't their trademark. They usually have an ampersand between the two initials, so I can't identify. But it's a terrific, terrific thing. Now, value-wise, have you ever had it assessed?
No.
Ever been interested?
No.
I won't tell you then. Thanks very much for bringing it in. I feel I have to tell you because it is worth quite a lot of money. I mean, I think that in auction it would probably bring between £1,000 and £1,500.
You know, one of the additional attractions of coming to a place like Raby Castle is that in virtually every room we could have taken a picture off the wall, a piece of porcelain or furniture, and really made something quite fascinating out of it, because the whole house, the whole castle is full of history. This piece, for instance, no exception. Hugo, I gather we know when it was made, where, by whom, how much it cost.
And for whom.
And for whom, and how it got here.
Yes, it was made at the Meissen factory in 1732 for Augustus the Strong, who was the patron of the factory. It was modelled by Johann Joachim Candler, the greatest animal modeler in porcelain, certainly, who ever lived. It cost 206 thalers. There were 6 of them made. They were part of an enormous scheme. But what happened was in the 19th century, the entire contents of Augustus's collection went out of favor. And 5 of them appeared at a sale in Christie's in London in the late 1850s and were purchased by the then Duke of Cleveland for this house. Here's one, and the other 4 pieces are around this room. What they didn't know was that when you tried to fire this mass of porcelain to create this thing, that the escaping moisture creates tremendous problems, which we can see here with great cracks. There are cracks all over it.
So that happened in the firing?
That happened.
Not an accident afterwards?
Not an accident after. The thing came apart because of the pressure of the moisture escaping. And in fact, by the late 1730s, they decided that making big animals was no good, and they went back to making the smaller ones we now take for granted.
It's not unique.
Yes.
But if that was to come to auction today, what would it fetch?
More than any other piece of European porcelain has ever fetched.
One of the marks of quality of a good bit of English furniture is how such a table as this opens at the back to support the top.
Yeah.
Now, the less expensive variety had 1 leg to open in the middle. The best always had 2 legs.
Yeah.
So if you could open your side, look at those wonderful hinges. Look at them. And I think that hinge was made in, what, 1780, 1785?
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. A wonderful, wonderful example of the craft of the man who made a hinge for a fold-over top table like that. And of course, the other lovely thing is when you do open it up, it's not a round table. People call them half-circle tables. It's not a half-circle, it's an oval.
Yes.
Because it's slightly less than a half-circle. And this wonderful, wonderful top. This is lovely. Mahogany on the outside. Then you've got a broad band of satinwood with marquetry inlays. And then yew wood on the outside.
Yew.
And no question of this being later, because the depth of this veneer, quite apparent by where it's curling up, is all hand-cut veneer, it's all thick veneer. I'm going to turn it up now, have a look underneath. Yep. And you see how the front of that is built up. It looks as if it's sliced into sections, and what they've done, that piece of deal that makes the front rail was sliced about every ½ an inch, cut through to the front, and that enabled it to curve. And then they glued it together. It's called kerfing. The only criticism I would have of it is that if we look at the front, you can see at the top of the legs, that carving and that moulding was put on later. And I think that was done about 1890, about 100 years ago. You can imagine the chap in the workshop saying, by the way, I can bring that up to date for you if you like, put a little patry at the top here, remold the leg, put some casters on, it'll look wonderful. Still, a card table today worth in the region of £3,500 to £4,000.
I think that's more than it was paid for.
I'm sure. So, thank you very much.
Oh, I see. This is the thing you were talking about, the inscription. And this is Joyce.
This is Lord Joyce, known as Lord Horhock.
Lord Horhock, Germany calling,
That's
Germany
right,
calling,
yes.
And it's dated the 12th of December 1945. Well, he must have been in prison by this stage.
That's right. He was in Wandsworth prison,
Yes.
and my father was sitting on condemned cell duty. He was a prison officer, and he sat with him right until the time he was taken out to be hung, which was, I think, the 3rd of January 1946.
So this is just within a few weeks of his hanging. It says, with every good wish and in gratitude for your companionship, keep faith with your conscience, and much may hurt, but nothing can kill. Good luck, William Joyce. I mean, the diary itself is absolutely nothing at all. I mean,
That's
just
right,
a little pocket diary for 1946. But the fact that your father had it and got it signed by Joyce a few days almost before he was hung as a traitor makes it very much curio, an item very much for collectors of World War II memorabilia. Thank you very much. It's odd, isn't it, with all the decoration?
Well, I mean, I know, I've never seen anything like it, but then I just don't know much about Ivory. Where do you think it's from?
I think
really Goanese or Dieppe, and either very old or not very old.
Right. Well, thanks. That's a great help.
Hugo's the man. Hugo can. It is most unusual with all this gold pinwork, gold and silver. Obviously, it means something too, all with the couple all together, and some sort of either marriage or allegorical, or or the king X and king Y and queen Y. That's.
Yes, with the crown on there. All right.
I hate to see them in fireplaces. You know, it seems wrong to find Minton tiles in a fireplace, but when you find them in a planter like this, I think they're seen in all their true glory. The nice thing also is that the planter itself, you've got the manufacturer's name of H. Greaves of New Street, Birmingham, a registration number 4599, which dates it to around about the 1880s, and I think it works well. Is this an inheritance or oh no, it's a purchase, is it?
I bought it, yes, about 8 years ago.
8 years ago, right. People are always saying to me, what's a good buy? And I don't think you can get a better buy than Victorian tiles. I mean, they're there, and you can, individually, you could probably buy these tiles for a little more than, let's say, £15 to £25 each. Okay. So, just adding together, we've got the best part of £60 to £90 worth of tiles, but the fact that they're in the frame is certainly going to increase the value. Now, this is the crunch bit, because this is where I say, well, do you mind me asking, how much you actually paid for it? And it was 8 years ago.
205.
205?
You wouldn't take two for it.
You obviously bought it somewhere in Yorkshire. Yes?
No.
Oh, you didn't? No.
In the northeast.
In the northeast.
Simon said that he thought it either might be Dieppe or Goan.
I don't think it's Dieppe.
Right.
I mean, it's not really my field, but again, my gut reaction is that these faces look awfully sort of Portuguese, Indian to me. And I think this decoration reminds me of sort of Jaipur enamel techniques, all this speckly stuff.
And what is that? Are those nails or?
Aren't they little bits of enamel?
Perhaps they are.
Inserts of enamel. I think it's a bit worn.
What sort of date do you think it is?
I think it's 19th century.
Right.
I would say first half of 19th century, which would be right if it was Dieppe or right if it was Goanese.
Now, it's a very interesting piece. Tell me about how it came into your family.
Well, it was acquired probably in Gibraltar by a great uncle of mine who was a chaplain to the forces in the First World War. Subsequently, he became Methodist minister on the Rock for 29 years, I think.
Right.
And he died in 1951. And when he died, it found its way to this country and was in the house of an aunt of mine until 3 or 4 years ago, and I got it.
Wonderful. Well, it's a very early piece. I mean, this is a bit of late 17th, early 18th century furniture. What have you started to do to it? I mean, have you...
Well, to be quite honest, apart from treating it, which we possibly shouldn't have done, we've done very little to it.
What you have to be careful of is if you're treating it for woodworm, each of the little wormholes has to be treated individually. You mustn't paint it on, because you'll get it sort of going all sorts of directions. Underneath here, there are lots of little holes running along like an underground tube service. And of course, you can squirt here and it will spread, if you're not very careful, uncontrollably, and then you get patches of oil coming out. In the meantime, just a little gentle waxing to give it a little life, to bring it back, stop it shrinking anymore, and it will stabilize the whole thing. Very soft, colorless wax, so it has to be, just boot polish is fine. You don't have to have a lot of expensive waxes, boot polish is fine. That will also bring a little color and life back into the tortoiseshell. I think it's a most amazing thing, really is, an extraordinary story. And I see even some of this is gilded. Clean all the metalwork very carefully, no abrasive polish, and it's a piece, even in this condition, worth, between £2,500 and £3,500. But the thing that I haven't even seen yet, haven't looked at yet, is the table it's standing on, which is wonderful. This is a Spanish table from the early 18th century. It has a walnut veneered and marquetry covered top on ebonized and barley sugar twist stems and legs, and these great big, wonderful, sweeping, curving iron supports, which is typical of the period, but very fashionable today, very saleable. This is lovely. I like the table as much as the cabinet. And I haven't really looked, and this has always been with it, has it?
Yes, as far as I know. Would it actually go with it originally?
Well, not this particular one, but it's so close it doesn't matter. Yes, it would have had a table of this sort to stand on. That table is stunning, really good one. Very pleased to see that. Lovely thick veneers. Gosh, 2 for the price of 1. That's something of a surprise. The table, worth £3,500. Certainly worth as much, if not slightly more, than the cabinet at the moment.
You obviously know these are raw Worcester and they're painted with fruit. And here you've got the work on this plate of George Cole, isn't it? There's the signature there, G.H. Cole, a painter who'd come from the Granger factory to raw Worcester and was a splendidly fine fruit painter, but specialised more in flowers. I think the flowers were his best subject, but the fruit was remarkably good. But to me, I think the greatest piece of all is this one here, this plate, which I think is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenally beautiful, painted by Richard Seabright. See his signature down there, R. Seabright. To me, he was the king of fruit painters. His work is absolutely indescribably beautiful. I mean, you can touch these fruits and leave a mark on the bloom of it. You can pick up these little blackberries and they're succulently wonderful, aren't they? He was a phenomenal painter, and yet he painted extremely slowly, so slowly that at the end of the Second World War, when he was still painting there after about 50 years of painting, he was only earning about £1 a week because he wouldn't quicken up his speed to paint quickly. Now regarded as the greatest fruit painter of all time. Have you got them insured?
On the house insurance, yes.
Yes, which is possibly not enough to cope with the Cole plate, I suppose £500–600, but I think the Seabright plate ought to be £700 or £800. So, does that cover by insurance?
No.
Well, you go back and do it, won't you?
Yes.
Hillary's hawked this round almost all of us, trying to find out what it is, and it's ended with me. I have to confess, it's not exactly my scene, but I think I know what it is. Do you know what it is?
I don't know what it is. I know it's ivory.
Yeah.
And it's sat in the bottom of my mother's cupboard since she found it in the bottom of my grandmother's cupboard after she died. And we don't know what it is, which is why we brought it here.
The mount here is gold, and in fact, I think these studs are probably gold as well. The bluey green ones, I think, are copper. Which I think that's what's happened. They're brass, which is tarnished, and it's made it rather like jewels. I mean, look at this wonderful colour coming through.
It's beautiful,
here.
the green actually. It's rather more pretty than it was originally.
Absolutely. I mean, it's helped it enormously, and it could well be Goan. Goa was, of course, controlled by the Dutch. Certainly, the features of the figures and the way this piqué work is done, and the figures of the angels, corresponds very closely to figures of Christ, which they carved for sort of sending back to Holland. In fact, this unscrews, as I presume you knew,
yes,
and it's got the fitting for whatever it was. Now, a knife, I don't think that this is a knife. I think a scepter or parasol handle or something is more likely.
We asked the Victorian Albert Museum what they thought it was.
Did you? And what did they say it was?
They said it could be a knife handle, possibly William and Mary with the King and Queen on it.
Right. That is where I've got to. The figures here have got crossed scepter and sword, which suggests coronation, as does the linking here with the tiara. And the cupids are putting a crown on their heads. So I strongly believe that this is commemorating their marriage in 1689.
Do you have any idea what it might actually have been for, or who it might have been made for, and why?
It's of such good quality that I reckon it was probably made for either them themselves or a courtier, a high-ranking courtier. But, I mean, we're looking, I would have thought, at several £1,000s for it. You'll probably never discover the full truth, but the price you could find.
Well, the end of our visit to Raby Castle today, and indeed the end of the road for us, the final programme in this current series. As always, many memorable moments. I'll particularly recall the fine collection of silver we had in Crawley, and I'll never forget that model ship that we found in Exeter. That was a Hillary Kay, of course, and made by a French prisoner of war, probably in Dartmoor, in the early part of the 19th century. The Antiques Roadshow, I have to say, is a continuing pleasure for us, because in a few weeks' time we'll be off on the road again, preparing a series which you'll be able to see in somewhat less than a year. And if you hear of an Antiques Roadshow coming to your area, then do come along and join us. As always, these programmes are made by you, the public. So until we meet again on the air or on the road, from all of us here in County Durham, goodbye.